I didn't want to be on this ship. That's the first thing you should know. I signed up because the money was good and I needed to get away from some stuff back home. Messy breakup, overdue rent, the usual crap that piles up when you're not paying attention. But mostly, I needed the cash. The Yamal was a Russian icebreaker that ran research expeditions through the Arctic Circle. Big red monster of a ship with a reinforced hull that could smash through ice 3 meters thick. The kind of vessel that makes you feel small standing next to it, even at the dock. I'd worked on cargo ships before, but never something like this. Never this far north. Never in this kind of cold. Captain William Smith met me at the gangway my first morning. Tall guy, maybe late 50s, with this weathered face that told you he'd seen some serious shit in his time. He had a thin scar running down his left cheek that pulled his mouth into a permanent half-frown. Russian accent so thick you could spread it on bread. "Thomas Pina?" he asked, extending a gloved hand. "Yes, sir," I said, shaking it. His grip was firm. Testing. "Follow me to my quarters. We need to discuss your duties." I grabbed my duffel and followed him up the metal stairs and through a maze of narrow corridors. The ship smelled like diesel fuel and metal and salt. That industrial smell all ships have, but with something else underneath. Something colder. The captain's quarters weren't fancy. Just a small office with a desk, some filing cabinets, and a porthole window that looked out over the harbor. Maps on the walls. A photo of what I guessed was his family. "Sit," he said, pointing to a chair across from his desk. I dropped into it while he settled into his own. He pulled out a folder with my name on it and flipped it open. 3 years on the Pacific Star, 2 on the Bremen. Good recommendations. He looked up at me, but no ice experience. "No, sir," I admitted. "First time." He nodded slowly, studying me. "The Arctic is different, more dangerous. You must understand this. I've been through storms before, Captain. I can handle—" "Not the weather," he cut me off. "Other things." Something in his tone made me pay attention. His eyes had gone hard, serious in a way that didn't match the conversation we were having. "What other things?" I asked. Instead of answering, he pulled out a sheet of paper from the folder and slid it across the desk to me. I picked it up. It was a typed list with 5 items on it. "These are rules," he said. "Special rules for this ship. For this route. You will memorize them." I looked down at the paper. 1. Never stare at the ice for more than 10 seconds. 2. If you hear knocking from the ice, ignore it. 3. If passengers ask where we are going, do not tell them the truth. 4. Report any missing lifeboats immediately. 5. Never follow lone seagulls. I read it twice, waiting for the punchline. When none came, I looked up at the captain. His face was dead serious. "Is this some kind of joke?" I asked. "For the new guy?" His expression didn't change. "This is not joke, Mr. Pina. These rules keep crew alive." I glanced back down at the paper. Never stare at the ice? Don't follow seagulls? It sounded like the kind of bullshit veterans tell rookies to mess with them. I'd been through it before on other ships. "Right," I said, trying to keep my tone respectful. I'll keep these in mind." The captain leaned forward, his eyes locked on mine. "Not in mind, in heart. Follow rules exactly, no exceptions." I nodded, not knowing what else to say. Maybe this was just his way of establishing authority, some weird power trip. Or maybe the old man was just superstitious. Sailors are like that sometimes, especially the ones who've been at sea for decades. "I'll follow the rules," I said. He held my gaze for another few seconds, then seemed satisfied. He leaned back and continued with the actual briefing. My shifts, duties, chain of command, emergency procedures. All the standard stuff I'd expected. But that weird list sat between us on the desk for the entire meeting. When we finished, he handed me a map of the ship and told me to report to the engine room at 0600 tomorrow to meet Chief Engineer Farley. "One more thing," he said as I stood to leave. "The rules. Tell no one I gave them to you." I nodded, folded the paper, and stuffed it in my pocket. As I walked back through the corridors to find my quarters, I couldn't help thinking I'd made a mistake signing on with this crew. My bunk was in a small room I shared with another guy. Lewis Garrett, according to the name tag on his locker. He wasn't there when I arrived, so I unpacked my stuff and got settled in. The room was tight but functional. 2 bunks, 2 lockers, a tiny bathroom. Standard ship accommodations. I pulled out the list again and read it over. It had to be some kind of initiation thing. Probably the captain did this with all new crew members, seeing who was gullible enough to actually follow these ridiculous rules. I'd been at sea long enough to know how these things worked. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. "Hey, you must be Thomas." A guy about my age, maybe younger, stood in the doorway. Blonde hair, bright blue eyes, the kind of energetic presence that fills a room. He had a small anchor tattoo on his wrist. "Louis Garrett," he said, extending his hand. "Guess we're roommates." "Thomas Pena," I said, shaking it. "Good to meet you." "First time on the Yamal?" he asked, dropping onto his bunk. "Yeah, you?" "Second voyage. First one was just 3 months ago." He grinned. "Don't worry, it's not as bad as they make it sound. The ice is actually pretty cool, no pun intended." I smiled politely. The captain gave me my orientation. Seemed intense. "Smith?" "Yeah, he's got that whole scary Russian captain vibe going, but he knows his stuff." Lewis leaned forward. "Did he give you the rules?" My heart sank a little. So it wasn't just me. It really was some kind of hazing ritual they did with all the new people. "Yeah," I admitted. "The ice staring thing and all that." Lewis nodded, his expression suddenly serious. "Listen to him. Those rules matter." I waited for him to crack a smile to let me know he was in on the joke, but he just kept looking at me with those earnest blue eyes. "Come on," I said. "Knocking ice? Lone seagulls? You can't be serious." Lewis glanced at the door, then lowered his voice. "Look, I thought it was bullshit too, my first time out. But I've seen some things. We all have." "What kind of things?" He opened his mouth to answer, then seemed to think better of it. "Just follow the rules, okay? Especially number 1 and 2. Before I could press him further, he stood up. "I've got to get to my shift. Ship leaves at 800 tomorrow. You should get some sleep." And then he was gone, leaving me wondering if everyone on this damn ship was in on some elaborate prank. The next few days were a blur of getting oriented, learning the ship's systems, and settling into my role. The Yamal was a complex vessel with redundant systems for everything. When you're breaking ice in the Arctic, you can't afford equipment failures. I met Chief Engineer Devin Farley my first morning. Big guy with a thick beard and hands that looked like they could bend steel. He ran the engine room like a dictator, but seemed to know every pipe, valve, and circuit on the ship by heart. "So you're the new guy," he said, looking me over. "Ever worked with a Wright M200 nuclear propulsion system?" "No, sir," I admitted. "Didn't think so. Stay close, do exactly what I say, and maybe you'll live long enough to learn something." Despite his gruff manner, Farley was a good teacher, patient when it mattered, exacting when it came to safety procedures. By the end of the first day, I had a decent grasp of my responsibilities. I also met navigator Jacqueline Sanchez during a safety briefing. She was all business, auburn hair pulled back in a tight braid, green eyes that missed nothing, the kind of competence that doesn't need to show off. She ran through the navigation systems with mechanical precision, barely looking at her notes. "Questions?" she asked when she finished. "Just one," I said. "What's our exact destination?" Something flickered across her face. Caution, maybe. "We follow the captain's course. You'll be informed of waypoints as needed." It seemed like an odd response for a simple question, but I didn't push it. The ship left port right on schedule, pushing north through increasingly cold waters. I fell into the rhythm of my shifts, did my job, and tried to get to know the crew. Most were friendly enough, if a bit reserved. The research team kept to themselves mostly, a group of scientists studying ice formations, marine biology, and climate patterns. One of them, a woman named Becky Pena, no relation we checked, sometimes ate in the crew mess. She was a marine biologist, studying something about algae adaptations in extreme environments. I liked her. She had a way of explaining complex science stuff that made it interesting instead of confusing. "So the algae actually changes its cellular structure in response to the cold," she told me over dinner one night. "It's like it rewrites its own DNA on the fly." "Organisms aren't supposed to do that, right?" I asked. "Exactly." Her eyes lit up. "That's what makes this region so fascinating. We're finding adaptations here that shouldn't be possible according to conventional biology." I also met Dr. Boris Smith, who turned out to be the captain's nephew. Thin guy with the same intense gray eyes as his uncle, always scribbling in a notebook. He was studying ice formations or something. didn't talk much, but when he did, it was always about the ice, its patterns, its movements, its anomalies, as he called them. For the most part, everything seemed normal. A ship doing its job, a crew doing theirs. But there were moments, small things that didn't quite add up, like how the captain would sometimes stand on the bridge, staring out at the ice fields with binoculars, counting under his breath, or how certain areas of the ship were always locked, with no explanation given, or the way conversations would sometimes stop when I entered a room. And then there were the rules. That stupid list that I still couldn't take seriously, but that nagged at me all the same. I caught Lewis breaking rule number 1 constantly. He'd stand at the railing, staring at the ice for minutes at a time. Nothing ever happened to him. The whole thing had to be nonsense. About a week into the voyage, I was heading to my bunk after a long shift when I heard voices coming from a storage room. The door was cracked open, and I recognized Devin Farley's rumbling bass and Jacqueline Sanchez's clipped tones. "Can't just pretend nothing happened," Jacqueline was saying. "We lost 2 people. "And what would you have us do?" Farley replied. "Tell the new crew? Create a panic? They deserve to know what they're facing. They know the rules. That's enough." The rules didn't save Johnson or Mikhailov. There was a heavy silence. "They broke the rules," Farley said finally. "They got careless. Or maybe the rules aren't enough anymore," Jacqueline countered. "Something's changed out there. You've seen it too. The ice patterns, She stopped suddenly. I realized too late that I'd leaned too close to the door, pushing it open further. Both of them turned to look at me. Farley's face darkened. "Pina, what are you doing here?" "Just heading to my quarters," I said quickly. Didn't mean to interrupt. Jacqueline and Farley exchanged a look. "How much did you hear?" Jacqueline asked. "Nothing really," I lied. "Just walked up." Farley studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Get some rest. Early shift tomorrow." I continued down the corridor, heart beating faster than it should have. Who were Johnson and Mikhailov? What had happened to them? And what did it have to do with the rules? For the first time since receiving that strange list, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was something to it after all. When I got back to my quarters, Louis was already asleep. I sat on my bunk, thinking about what I'd overheard. Lost 2 people. The ice patterns. Something's changed out there. I pulled out the list again and read it over. The captain's grave expression when he'd handed it to me. Lewis's earnest warning. Farley and Jacqueline's argument. Maybe these weren't just superstitions. Maybe there was something else going on here. Something no one was willing to explain to the new guy. I folded the paper and put it in my pocket. Whatever was happening on this ship, whatever secrets they were keeping, I had a feeling I was going to find out soon enough, and I wasn't sure I was going to like it. I was on deck duty the second week when it happened. Just me and the vast emptiness, checking equipment and logging temperature readings. Standard stuff. Boring stuff, really. The Yamal had pushed deeper north than I'd expected. We'd been breaking through progressively thicker ice for days now. You could feel the difference, the way the ship shuddered differently, the deeper groan of ice giving way beneath us. I'd finished my checks early and had maybe 20 minutes before I needed to radio in. So I just stood there at the port railing, taking in the view. When you're that far north in winter, you don't get proper daylight. Just this weird twilight that hangs around for a few hours. Not quite day, not quite night. Everything looks different in that light. The ice stretched out forever, white and blue and gray, cracked into puzzle pieces where the ship had forced its way through. Some spots were smooth as glass, others jagged and broken where pressure had forced sheets to collide. Steam rose from the newly exposed water where we'd broken through. I wasn't thinking about the rules. Honestly, I'd gotten comfortable. A week on board and nothing weird had happened. The whole thing with the list seemed like some elaborate joke the old-timers played on newcomers. Louis had been jumpy, sure, but Louis struck me as the jumpy type anyway. So I watched the ice. At first, I was just killing time. But then I noticed something. Patterns in the ice I hadn't seen before. Not random cracks and fissures, but something almost deliberate. The way certain lines connected. The way shadows pooled in certain hollows. I leaned forward, squinting. There was something about the way the twilight hit the surface. It created these shifting patterns that seemed to move even when the ice was perfectly still. "Huh," I said to nobody. I'd seen ice before, obviously, but not like this. Not this much of it, and not in this light. The endless white field wasn't just white when you really looked at it. There were blues so deep they were almost black, patches of gray that shifted with the clouds, areas where the ice thinned and the dark water beneath showed through. I don't know how long I stood there. The cold didn't register anymore. I just kept finding new patterns, new shapes forming and dissolving. That's when I saw the first face. It wasn't clear, just a suggestion, really. Two darker spots that could be eyes, a line that might be a mouth, a curve that suggested a cheek, probably just shadows and cracks. But then it moved. I blinked hard, told myself it was just the light changing as clouds shifted overhead. I should have walked away right then. Should have remembered the first rule. Never stare at the ice for more than 10 seconds. Instead, I kept looking. The face became clearer. Definitely a face now. A man's face, I thought. Gaunt, mouth slightly open, eyes wide and dark. Then it was gone, dissolved back into random patterns of ice. I rubbed my eyes. Got to get more sleep, I told myself. But when I looked again, there was another face. Different this time. Rounder, maybe a woman. And not in the same spot. This one was farther out, maybe 30 yards from the ship. My breath caught. I gripped the railing tighter. The second face disappeared too. But now I was seeing them everywhere. Faces forming and dissolving all across the ice field. Dozens of them. Men, women. Some looked peaceful. Others looked terrified. And then I saw the hands. They were reaching up, pressing against the underside of the ice. Palms flat, fingers spread, like they were trapped underneath, pushing to get out. I could see them clearly, so clearly, the detailed lines in the palms, the bend of each knuckle. I knew I should look away. Some part of my brain was screaming at me to turn around, to go inside, to do anything but keep staring. But I couldn't move, couldn't even blink. The hands began to move, scratching now, clawing at the underside of the ice. I swear I could hear it, a faint scraping sound carrying across the empty expanse. I don't know how long I stood frozen like that. Time stopped making sense. Could have been minutes or hours. The ship, the cold, my job. All of it faded away until there was nothing but me and the ice and what was beneath it. The pain hit suddenly, sharp and blinding, like someone had driven an ice pick through my temple. I gasped, grabbing my head with both hands, but I still couldn't look away. The ice was changing now. The faces weren't just suggestions anymore. They were clear and detailed and moving. Mouths opening in silent screams, eyes blinking, and beneath them, dark figures walking, full bodies moving under the ice, arms outstretched, reaching up toward me. The pain intensified, spread from my temple across my entire skull until it felt like my head was being crushed in a vice. Still, I couldn't look away. One figure was closer than the others, walking directly toward the ship, toward me. Its face became clearer as it approached. A man, young, familiar somehow. He was right below me now, looking up. His mouth moved. He was trying to say something. I leaned further over the railing, desperate to hear, to understand. He pressed both palms against the underside of the ice, directly beneath where I stood. His lips formed words I couldn't make out. The pain in my head was unbearable now. Black spots danced in my vision. The cold finally registered again, burning my lungs with each breath. The figure under the ice opened his mouth wider, and this time I heard him. Not with my ears, but somehow inside my head. "Help us." The voice wasn't human. It was wrong, distorted and layered, like dozens of voices speaking at once. It sent a wave of nausea through me so intense I nearly vomited over the railing. The ice around his hands began to crack. "Thomas?" A real voice. Behind me. Human. "Thomas, what are you doing?" I couldn't respond. Couldn't turn. The figure below the ice had almost broken through. His fingertips were pushing through the cracks, impossibly long and gray. Hands gripped my shoulders, pulling me back from the railing. The contact broke whatever hold the ice had on me. I stumbled backward, nearly falling. "Jesus, you're freezing." It was Becky. She was staring at me with wide, concerned eyes. "How long have you been out here?" I opened my mouth but couldn't form words. My teeth were chattering violently. I hadn't noticed the cold until now, but suddenly it was overwhelming. My fingers were numb. My face burned. "Let's get you inside," she said, guiding me toward the door. You're experiencing ice blindness. It happens up here. I looked back at the ice field. Nothing but ice. No faces, no hands, no figures walking beneath the surface. Just endless white and blue, cracked and broken by our passage. But I knew what I'd seen. Becky led me through the corridors to the small medical bay. I was shivering uncontrollably now. She wrapped a thermal blanket around my shoulders and sat me down on the exam table. How long were you staring at the ice? She asked, shining a penlight in my eyes. I swallowed hard. I don't know. Lost track of time. She nodded like this made perfect sense. The ice plays tricks on you up here. The light, the isolation, the cold, they all mess with your perception. Your eyes aren't used to it yet. I stopped myself, remembered the rules, remembered how no one talked about them openly. What did you see? She was preparing something at the counter. A syringe. Nothing, I said. Just thought I saw something moving. She turned back to me with a sympathetic smile. That's common too. The ice is always shifting, cracking. The mind tries to make patterns out of chaos. It's why the captain is so strict about observation protocols. So that's what they called it. Observation protocols. A nice scientific way of saying don't stare at the ice or you'll see dead people trapped underneath. This will help with the headache, she said, approaching with the syringe. And the hallucinations. I flinched. I didn't say anything about hallucinations. She paused, then shrugged. It's standard with ice blindness. Visual distortions, phantom sounds, sometimes even tactile sensations. Nothing to be embarrassed about. I let her inject whatever it was into my arm. Within minutes, the pain in my head began to subside. The shivering eased too. Rest here for a bit, she said. I'll check on you in an hour. You should be fine for your next shift. When she left, I sat there trying to make sense of what had happened. Was it really just ice blindness? Some weird Arctic phenomenon they warned newcomers about with a list of cryptic rules? But that didn't explain what Lewis had said. What I'd overheard between Farley and Sanchez about crew members who'd disappeared, who'd broken the rules. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, Becky was gently shaking my shoulder. How are you feeling? She asked. Better, actually. The headache was gone. I felt warm again, normal. Good, I said. Thanks. She handed me a small bottle of pills. Take one of these if the headache comes back. And Thomas, try not to stare at the ice for too long. It's not good for anyone up here. I nodded, took the pills, and headed back to my quarters. Lewis wasn't there, probably on shift. I collapsed onto my bunk and slept straight through until my alarm went off for night duty. The rest of the day passed without incident. I was careful not to look at the ice for more than a few seconds at a time. No one mentioned finding me on deck. No one asked questions. It was like it never happened. Until that night. I woke up standing in the corridor outside my quarters. The metal floor was ice cold against my bare feet. I was only wearing the t-shirt and boxers I'd fallen asleep in. No idea how I'd gotten there. For a second, I thought I was still dreaming. That foggy confusion where nothing quite connects, but the chill creeping up from my feet was too real. The low hum of the ship's engines too familiar. What the hell? I mumbled, blinking in the dim emergency lighting. Last thing I remembered was falling into my bunk after shift. Louis had been snoring in the top bunk. Now I was, sleepwalking? I turned to go back to my quarters when I heard it. Faint at first, like someone whispering from the end of a long tunnel. Not words exactly, more like the suggestion of words. The shape of them without the substance. I stopped, listened harder. There it was again, coming from somewhere ahead, down the corridor that led toward the outer deck. Hello? I called, not too loud. Didn't want to wake the whole ship just because I was sleepwalking. No answer, just those whispers. A little clearer now. Multiple voices, overlapping, urgent. I should have gone back to bed, should have chalked it up to weird dreams or stress or whatever Becky had injected me with earlier. But something about those whispers tugged at me, like they were calling my name, even though I couldn't make out any actual words. I started walking. Not a conscious decision, really. My feet just moved. The corridor seemed longer than usual, stretching out ahead of me. The whispers grew louder with each step, more distinct. Still couldn't understand them, but they had a rhythm now, almost like a chant. I reached the heavy door that led to the outer deck, Frost had formed around the edges. That wasn't normal. We were in sealed, heated quarters. There shouldn't be frost inside the ship. My hand reached for the wheel lock. The metal was so cold it burned my palm, but I couldn't pull away. The whispers were right on the other side now, clear enough that I could almost understand. Almost. I turned the wheel, pushed the door open. Arctic air hit me like a physical blow, but I barely felt it. All I could focus on were the voices, clearer now, saying. A hand clamped down on my shoulder, yanking me backward. The door slammed shut. "What do you think you're doing?" Captain Smith's voice, harsh with alarm. I blinked at him, disoriented. I don't know. I heard something. His grip tightened. In the dim light, his face looked gaunt, the scar on his cheek standing out white against his flushed skin. He was fully dressed in his cold weather gear, like he'd been on deck already. "You heard nothing," he said flatly. "You were sleepwalking." No, there were voices, on the deck. They were saying, "There is nothing on my deck except ice and wind." His accent was thicker when he was angry, each word precise and clipped. "And you were about to walk out there in your underwear, in minus 40 degrees. Put that way, it did sound crazy, but I knew what I'd heard. I wasn't sleepwalking, I insisted. I woke up in the corridor, and then I heard, 'You broke the first rule today.'" It wasn't a question. I stared at him, mouth open. How did he know? "Becky, Dr. Pina told you?" He made a dismissive gesture. "She didn't need to. I know the signs. The ice has ways of making itself known." That made no sense, but before I could say anything, he gripped both my shoulders, his fingers digging in painfully. "The ice remembers you now," he said, his voice low and intense. "It knows your face, your mind." A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature ran through me. I thought about the faces I'd seen in the ice, the hands reaching up, the figure trying to break through. "What does that mean?" I asked. "What is out there?" His expression softened slightly, but his grip didn't loosen. "Nothing that concerns you. Nothing you need to understand. You just need to follow the rules." "But the rules keep us alive," he cut me off. "You've seen what happens when you break the first one. Be more careful with the others." He finally released me, stepping back. For a moment, he looked tired, old. The harsh lighting deepened the lines in his face. "Go back to bed, Thomas," he said, "and put these under your pillow." He reached into his pocket and pulled out what looked like earplugs, but thicker, made of some dense material I didn't recognize. "What are they?" "Insurance," he said, against the whispers. I took them, rolling the strange material between my fingers. "Captain, what's really going on here? What's wrong with the ice?" He looked at me for a long moment, then glanced at the frost-rimmed door. "Nothing is wrong with the ice. It is doing what ice has always done. It is we who don't belong here." With that cryptic statement, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing barefoot in the cold corridor. I looked down at the earplugs in my hand, then back at the door. The whispers had stopped. Or maybe they were still there, but I couldn't hear them anymore. I went back to my quarters, my mind racing. Louis was still asleep, oblivious to everything. I climbed into my bunk and tucked the earplugs under my pillow as instructed. Sleep didn't come easily. I kept seeing those faces in the ice, kept hearing that distorted voice saying, "Help us." And now the captain's warning echoed alongside it. "The ice remembers you now." Whatever that meant, I had a feeling I was going to find out. And like I'd suspected from the beginning, I wasn't going to like it. I couldn't sleep after that conversation with the captain. I tossed and turned for hours, the earplugs digging into my palm where I still clutched them. Eventually, I must have dozed off because my alarm jarred me awake at 500. Louis's bunk was empty, not made, just empty. His shift had started at midnight, so he'd be finishing up soon. I dragged myself to the tiny bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, and stared at my reflection. Dark circles had formed under my eyes. I looked like hell. The earplugs sat on the edge of the sink where I'd placed them. Strange little things. Not the typical foam or silicone you'd buy at a drugstore. These were made of some dense material I couldn't identify, almost metallic but not quite. I picked them up, rolled them between my fingers, then tucked them into my pocket. "Insurance against the whispers," the captain had said. I headed down to the lower deck for my morning equipment check. The ship felt different today. Quieter, maybe. Or maybe that was just in my head. Everything felt off after what happened yesterday. The lower deck housed most of the mechanical systems: pumps, generators, water treatment. My job was simple: check pressure gauges, record temperatures, make sure nothing was leaking or overheating. Basic maintenance stuff. The kind of mindless work that usually let me think. And I had plenty to think about. Those faces in the ice, the voices, the captain's warning. The ice remembers you now. What the hell did that even mean? I moved methodically through my checklist, noting readings on my clipboard. The constant hum of machinery was almost comforting. Something normal and mechanical in a situation that felt increasingly abnormal. I just finished checking the port side bilge pumps when I heard it, a sound that didn't belong among the mechanical noises of the ship. Knock, knock, knock. I froze, clipboard half raised. The sound had come from the hull, the outer wall of the ship where it met the water, or in this case, the ice. I waited, telling myself I'd imagined it. Knock, knock, knock. There it was again. 3 distinct knocks, evenly spaced, deliberate. Rule number 2, ignore knocking from the ice. My mouth went dry. I took a step back from the hull, then another. The knocking came again. Same pattern. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. Pause. This wasn't random ice movement. This wasn't the normal groaning and creaking of a ship pushing through the Arctic. This was a pattern. This was communication. I turned to leave. Whatever was happening, I needed to report it to the captain. He'd know what to do. He'd warned me about this exact situation. "Hey, Thomas?" Louis's voice stopped me halfway to the stairs. He was coming down from the upper deck, still in his work clothes from the night shift. "You heading up? I thought I'd check on the..." He stopped, head tilted. The knocking had come again. "What's that?" "Nothing," I said quickly. "Just the ice shifting. I'm done here." Louis moved past me toward the sound. "That's not ice shifting. That's knocking. Louis, we should go." I tried to keep my voice casual, but something in my tone must have given me away. He glanced back at me, his eyes narrowing. "This is about those rules, isn't it? The ones Smith gave us? We need to report this to the captain." I took a step toward him, reaching for his arm. He sidestepped me. "It's just ice, Thomas. Or maybe someone's playing a joke. No one's down here but us." The knocking came again. Louis moved closer to the hull, pressing his hand against the metal. "Louis, don't. It's coming through right here." He placed his ear against the hull. "It's so clear, like someone's right on the other side." I wanted to grab him, to pull him away, but I found myself rooted to the spot. The second rule echoed in my head. Ignore knocking from the ice. "Louis, seriously, we need to go, now." He wasn't listening. His face had taken on an odd, distant expression. I think they're trying to communicate." "Who? There's nobody out there. It's solid ice for miles." "Listen." He held up his hand for silence. The knocking came again. 3 distinct knocks. "See?" Louis whispered. "It's a pattern. Someone's out there. That's impossible. Maybe it's Morse code." He tapped his finger against his thigh, matching the pattern. 3 knocks. That's S in Morse code. I hadn't thought of that. Could it be a distress signal? SOS was 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. But this was just 3 short, over and over. Louis pressed his ear harder against the hull. "I'm going to answer." "Don't." The word came out sharper than I intended. He looked at me, surprised. "Why not?" "Just don't." The captain specifically said to ignore knocking. "And you never wondered why?" Louis shook his head. "Don't you get it? There could be someone out there, someone in trouble. In the middle of the Arctic Ocean, under 3 feet of ice. Think about it, Louis." He stared at me for a long moment. "I'm answering." Before I could stop him, he raised his fist and knocked 3 times on the hull. The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Even the normal sounds of the ship, the hum of machinery, the distant thrum of the engines, seemed muted. Then it came. 3 knocks, louder this time, more insistent. Louis grinned. "See? They heard me." I backed away. "I'm getting the captain." "Wait." Louis knocked again, 3 times. The response was immediate. 3 knocks, but faster now, almost excited. "Lewis, stop it!" I grabbed his shoulder, trying to pull him away. He shrugged me off. "They're trying to tell us something." "There's nothing out there but ice and freezing water!" I was shouting now, my voice echoing in the confined space. Louis wasn't listening. He had both hands pressed against the hull, his ear to the metal. The knocking continued, faster and louder, no longer just 3 knocks. Now it was continuous, a frantic tattoo against the hull. "Louis!" He turned to me, his expression dazed. "They need help, Thomas. They're trapped. There's no one there." I grabbed his arm again, harder this time. The knocking stopped. The sudden silence was more terrifying than the sound had been. Louis stood frozen, his hands still pressed against the hull. "They stopped. Good, now let's go." I tugged at his arm. He shook his head. "No, I need to..." The hull vibrated beneath his hands. Not a knock this time. Something else. Something worse. I saw it in his face first. The confusion, then shock, then pain. His mouth opened in a silent scream. I let go of him and stumbled backward. "Louis?" His hands were still pressed against the hull, but now they seemed stuck there, like they were glued to the metal. His whole body was rigid, trembling. "Louis, what's happening?" He couldn't speak. His face contorted in pain or fear, or both. And then I saw it. The frost. It was spreading from the hull onto his hands, creeping up his wrists. "Jesus Christ!" I lunged forward, grabbing him around the waist, trying to pull him away. His hands wouldn't budge. The frost continued spreading, up his arms now, tiny crystals forming on his sleeves. His skin was turning blue where it touched the metal. "Help!" I shouted. "Somebody help!" Louis made a choking sound. His eyes were wide with terror, fixed on mine. I braced my foot against the hull and pulled with everything I had. Nothing happened. It was like he was part of the ship now, fused to the metal. The knocking started again, not from outside, from inside the hull, right where Louis's hands were frozen in place. The metal beneath his palms bulged outward, just slightly. Knock, knock, knock. I let go of him and staggered back. This wasn't happening, couldn't be happening. "I'm getting help," I told him, my voice cracking. Just hang on." I ran for the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. The ship's corridors were a blur as I sprinted toward the bridge. I crashed through the door without knocking, gasping for breath. Captain Smith was at the helm with Sanchez. They both turned at my entrance. "Louis," I panted. "Lower deck, something's wrong. His hands, they're stuck to the hull. There was knocking and he answered it, and now..." Smith's face hardened. "Knocking, from the ice. Yes, we need to help him. He's..." Smith was already moving, barking orders at Sanchez. "Sound general quarters. Get Farley and his team to the lower deck. Now." We ran back the way I'd come, Smith surprisingly fast for his age. 2 crewmen I didn't recognize fell in behind us. By the time we reached the lower deck, Farley was already there with 3 of his engineers. The space was empty. "He was right here," I said, pointing to the spot on the hull. His hands were frozen to the metal. Right here. There was nothing. No ice, no frost. No sign that Louis had ever been there. Smith approached the hull cautiously, examining the metal. "No marks," he said quietly. "No ice damage." "That's impossible. He was right here." His hands were stuck. The ice was spreading up his arms. Smith turned to Farley. "Check the exterior cameras. See if he went overboard." "He couldn't have," I insisted. "He was stuck to the hull. He couldn't move." Smith studied my face. "When exactly did this happen?" "Just now. 5 minutes ago, maybe less." "And you're certain he answered the knocking?" "Yes. 3 knocks. Just like the knocking from outside." Smith closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, his expression was grim. "Search the entire deck," he ordered the others. "Every compartment, every storage locker. Find him." The search took hours. They checked every inch of the lower deck, then expanded to the entire ship. Louis was gone. No sign of him in his quarters, the mess hall, the engine room. The exterior cameras showed no one going overboard. It was as if he'd simply vanished. I sat in the mess hall, a cup of coffee growing cold in front of me. Farley had suggested I eat something, but I couldn't stomach the thought of food. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Louis's face, contorted in terror as the ice crept up his arms. Smith slid into the seat across from me, his face haggard. "Tell me again, every detail." I went through it all again. The knocking. Lewis answering. The frost spreading from the hull onto his hands and arms, the way the metal seemed to bulge outward beneath his palms. Smith listened without interrupting. When I finished, he sat in silence for a long moment. "You think I'm crazy?" I finally said. "No." His voice was flat. "I think you witnessed something few have seen and lived to tell about." A chill ran through me. "What happened to him?" "He broke rule number 2. Smith's eyes were cold. He should have ignored the knocking. But what was it? What was knocking? It doesn't matter what it was. What matters is that he answered. I slammed my hand on the table. "Bullshit! A man is gone. My roommate is gone. You can't just brush this off with cryptic warnings about rules." Smith didn't flinch at my outburst. "I gave you those rules to keep you alive, Pina. Not as some kind of initiation prank. Not as a test to keep you alive." "Then tell me what we're dealing with. What's out there in the ice?" He shook his head. "Knowledge won't protect you. Obedience will." I stared at him, disbelieving. "So that's it? Louis is just gone? And we do nothing? We'll log it as a missing person case. That's procedure." "Procedure?" He was literally frozen to the hull in front of me. Smith stood up. "Get some rest, Pina. You're relieved of duties for the remainder of the day." I watched him walk away, too stunned to argue further. Louis was gone, really gone, and no one seemed surprised except me. I went back to my quarters, now eerily empty with Louis's bunk untouched from the night before. His locker was still full of his things, clothes, books, his prized pocket knife. It felt wrong to touch any of it, like I was admitting he wasn't coming back. I sat on my bunk, head in my hands. What the hell had I just witnessed? People didn't just freeze to ship hulls and disappear. It wasn't possible. Something caught my eye. A notebook sticking out from under Louis's pillow. I hesitated, then reached for it. It felt like an invasion of privacy, but if there was anything in there that might explain what happened. The notebook was filled with Louis's handwriting. Daily entries. Sometimes just a few lines about the weather or work assignments. I flipped through it, scanning for anything unusual. Then I found the drawings. They started about halfway through the notebook. Crude sketches at first, just shapes in the ice, then more detailed. Faces, hands, figures. Human-like, but wrong somehow. Too elongated, eyes too large, fingers too many. The drawings got more detailed as I turned the pages. Whole bodies now, suspended in ice or moving beneath it. Notes scrawled in the margins. They're trying to communicate. They need help. They're trapped. The last entry was dated yesterday. I hear them at night now, not just when I'm on deck looking at the ice, in my dreams, in the walls. They're looking for a way in or a way out. I'm not sure anymore. Thomas doesn't hear them. No one does. Am I going crazy, or am I just the only one listening? Beneath this was a detailed drawing of a face pressed against ice, hands splayed beside it. The face was distorted, mouth open in what could be a scream or a plea. It looked too much like what I'd seen in the ice the day before. I closed the notebook, my hands shaking. Louis had been seeing them too. For how long? Weeks. And he'd been listening to them, communicating with them maybe. A knock at the door made me jump. I shoved the notebook under my pillow just as the door opened. It was Becky. "Thomas, can I come in?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. She sat beside me on the bunk. "I heard about Louis. I'm so sorry." "They're acting like it's normal," I said. "Like people just disappear on ships all the time." Becky was quiet for a moment. "It's not the first time," she finally said. "Not on this ship." I looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" "There have been others. On previous voyages. Crew members who went missing. No explanation, no bodies found." "How many?" She hesitated. "I know of at least 3. There might be more." "And nobody talks about this? Nobody investigates? The official reports say they went overboard. Accidents happen at sea." "But you don't believe that?" She met my eyes. "I believe something's happening on this ship. Something the captain understands better than he's letting on." I thought about the rules, about the captain's warning that the ice remembered me. "Did you ever get a list of rules when you first came aboard?" She shook her head. "No. What kind of rules?" I hesitated, remembering Smith's order not to tell anyone. but Lewis was gone, and Becky might know something that could help. I pulled the folded paper from my pocket and handed it to her. She read it, her expression growing more confused with each line. "This doesn't make any sense." "It does if you've seen what's in the ice." Her eyes snapped up to mine. "What have you seen?" I told her everything. The faces in the ice, the hands, the voices asking for help, what had happened to Lewis. By the time I finished, her face had gone pale. "Thomas, these are classic symptoms of Arctic hysteria. Isolation, cold, the constant darkness. They can cause hallucinations, paranoia." This wasn't a hallucination. Louis saw it too. It's in his journal. I pulled out the notebook, showing her the drawings. She flipped through the pages slowly, her scientific skepticism visibly warring with what she was seeing. "This doesn't prove anything. Lewis could have been suffering from the same condition. We both hallucinated the exact same thing, and it just happens to match up with these rules the captain gave us. Come on, Becky. You're a scientist. What are the odds?" Before she could answer, the ship's intercom crackled to life. "All hands to the mess hall. Repeat, all hands to the mess hall immediately." Becky stood up. "We should go." The mess hall was packed with crew members, all looking confused or concerned. Captain Smith stood at the front, his face grave. He waited until everyone had quieted down before speaking. "By now, most of you have heard that we've lost a crew member. Lewis Garrett was reported missing this morning. We've conducted a thorough search of the ship and found no sign of him." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Smith held up his hand for silence. "This is a difficult time. The isolation and conditions we face can take a toll on the mind. I want to remind everyone of the importance of following safety protocols. No one is to be alone on deck. All exterior hatches are to remain secured when not in active use." He paused, his eyes scanning the room, lingering briefly on me. "Some of you received specific instructions when you joined this expedition. I cannot stress enough the importance of following those instructions to the letter. Not just for your safety, but for the safety of everyone aboard." The room was dead silent now. "That is all. Regular duties resume immediately." Dismissed. People began filing out, talking in hushed voices. I stayed where I was, watching Smith. He caught my eye and gave me the smallest of nods before turning away. Becky touched my arm. "Are you okay?" "No," I said honestly. "I'm not. Try to get some rest. I can ask Dr. Petrov for something to help you sleep if you want." I shook my head. "I'm fine." She didn't look convinced but didn't push it. "If you need anything, you know where to find me." I spent the rest of the day in a daze, going through the motions of my duties without really focusing on any of them. By the time night came, I was exhausted, but knew sleep would be impossible. I returned to my empty quarters, the silence oppressive where Louis's breathing should have been. I lay on my bunk, staring at the ceiling. Louis's notebook was still under my pillow. His drawings kept flashing through my mind, mixing with the memory of his face as the frost crept up his arms. The ship creaked around me, the normal sounds of a vessel at sea. I tried to focus on them, to let them lull me toward sleep. That's when I heard it. Faint at first, so faint I thought I was imagining it. Knock, 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 knock. 5 knocks now, not 3, coming from inside the wall beside my bunk. I sat up, heart pounding. The knocking came again, 5 distinct knocks, evenly spaced. Then silence. I pressed my ear against the wall, holding my breath. Nothing. Then, so quiet I almost missed it. A voice. Not from outside. From inside the wall. Thomas. It was Lewis's voice. The knocking began again. 5 knocks. Pause. 5 knocks. Coming from inside the wall of my cabin. I was still sitting there staring at the wall when morning came. Didn't sleep. Couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd hear the knocking again. 5 knocks. Then Louis's voice. The ship hummed around me. The familiar mechanical sounds that should have been comforting. But they weren't. Not anymore. Not with Louis gone and his voice somehow coming from inside my cabin wall. I got dressed mechanically, pulling on my work clothes without really thinking about it. My hands kept shaking. Had to try twice to button my shirt. I kept glancing at the wall, half expecting it to, I don't know. Open up? Speak again? It was the 3rd week of our voyage now. 3 weeks since I'd first stepped aboard the Yamal. 1 week since Louis had vanished. The rules paper felt heavy in my pocket as I headed to the mess hall. The place was quiet. Too quiet. Everyone eating with their heads down, no one making eye contact. Louis's disappearance had changed things. The crew was spooked. Hell, I was spooked. I grabbed some coffee, skipped the food line. Couldn't eat anyway. My stomach was a tight knot of anxiety and exhaustion. I found an empty table and sat down, wrapping my hands around the mug for warmth. "You look like shit," Becky said, sliding into the seat across from me. I managed a weak smile. "Thanks. Did you sleep at all?" She leaned forward, studying my face. The concern in her eyes was genuine. "Not really." I took a sip of coffee, kept hearing things. She nodded slowly. "I could still get you something from Dr. Petrov, just to help you sleep." "I'm fine." I wasn't, but I didn't want to be drugged. Needed to stay alert. Got assigned to equipment maintenance today. Should keep me busy. "Thomas," she hesitated. "Have you considered that maybe we should tell someone? About what happened to Louis, I mean. When we get back." I looked at her. "You think anyone would believe us?" She didn't answer. Didn't need to. We both knew how it would sound. Faces in the ice, knocking, people vanishing without a trace. "I should get going," I said, standing up. "Equipment won't clean itself." The maintenance bay was on the lower deck, a large room filled with diving gear, environmental monitoring equipment, and various tools. My job was simple: clean and check everything, log any issues. Mindless work. Exactly what I needed. I'd been at it for about an hour, methodically cleaning and testing each piece of equipment, when I heard the door open behind me. Figured it was Farley coming to check on my progress. "Almost done with the first batch," I said without looking up from the oxygen regulator I was cleaning. "Excuse me." I froze. The voice wasn't Farley's, wasn't anyone's I recognized. I turned around slowly. A man stood in the doorway. Tall, thin, wearing proper cold weather gear. The same insulated jackets and pants we all wore on board. Dark hair, pale face. Nothing particularly strange about him, except I'd never seen him before. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, smiling politely. "I was looking for someone who could help me." I set down the regulator, wiping my hands on a rag. "What do you need?" He stepped further into the room, looking around with mild interest. "I'm a bit turned around, I'm afraid. Still getting used to the ship's layout." His accent was slight, maybe Scandinavian. "I was wondering if you could tell me where we're headed. Our destination." My mind flashed to the rules. Rule 3. Don't tell passengers true destination. I hesitated, trying to keep my face neutral. Was this a test? Had Smith sent someone to see if I'd follow the rules? "South America," I said, the lie coming easily. "Research station off the coast of Chile." The man smiled, not the reaction I expected. It wasn't a gotcha smile or a confused one. It was satisfied, like I'd confirmed something he already knew. "Thank you," he said. "That's very helpful." He turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. I stood there for a moment, then rushed to the door, looked both ways down the hallway. Empty, completely empty. No sign of him. That wasn't possible. The corridor stretched straight for at least 50 feet before turning. He couldn't have just disappeared, unless he'd gone into one of the rooms, but most of them were locked storage. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Thought about Louis, about the knocking, about the faces in the ice. I abandoned the equipment and headed straight for the bridge. Didn't run, didn't want to freak out any crew I passed, but walked fast. My heart was pounding by the time I got there. Smith was standing over a chart with Sanchez, both of them deep in conversation. They looked up when I burst in. "There's someone on the ship," I said, trying to catch my breath. "Someone I don't recognize." Smith straightened up immediately. "Describe them." I told him everything. The man's appearance, his accent, the question about our destination. Smith and Sanchez exchanged looks. "And you said?" Smith asked, his voice tight. "South America, Chile, just like the rule says." Smith nodded once, sharply. "Jacqueline, get the manifest. All crew, all researchers." Sanchez moved to a computer terminal, fingers flying over the keyboard. Smith turned back to me. "You're certain you've never seen this individual before?" "Positive. I've been here 3 weeks. I know every face on this ship." Smith's expression darkened. "Stay here." He went to the communication panel, pressed a button. "Attention all hands. This is the captain. We have an unauthorized individual on board. Secure all sensitive areas immediately. All crew report sightings to the bridge. This is not a drill." The ship seemed to hold its breath. Smith turned back to me. "Where exactly did you see him?" "Maintenance bay, lower deck, about 10 minutes ago. But he disappeared. I looked right after he left and the corridor was empty." "That's not possible," Sanchez said, looking up from the terminal. "I've checked the manifest twice. Every crew member, every researcher is accounted for. There's no extra person." "I know what I saw," I insisted. "I believe you," Smith said quietly. "That's what worries me." The next few hours were tense. The entire crew searched the ship from top to bottom. Every room, every storage compartment, every possible hiding place. Nothing. No sign of the mysterious passenger. I helped with the search, moving methodically through the ship with a group led by Farley. The big engineer didn't say much, just grunted and kept his eyes moving. But I could tell he was unsettled. Everyone was. "You really saw someone?" he asked as we checked a storage locker. "Yeah, talk to him." Farley made a sound under his breath, something in Russian that I didn't catch. Sounded like a prayer. By evening, the search was called off. We'd found nothing, no trace of the man I'd seen. The crew gathered in the mess hall, where Smith addressed us. "The search has turned up no unauthorized personnel," he said, his voice echoing in the silent room. "Security protocols remain in effect. No one is to be alone in any part of the ship. All exterior hatches are to remain secured. Report any unusual sightings immediately." I felt people looking at me, some curious, some suspicious. The guy who cried wolf. But Smith believed me. That counted for something. After the meeting, I went back to finish my equipment work. Didn't want to go back to my empty cabin. Not yet. Not with the memory of Lewis's voice still fresh in my mind. I was checking the diving equipment, running through the standard safety inspection, when I noticed something odd. There was a gap in the equipment rack, a space where something should have been, but wasn't. I checked the inventory list on the clipboard hanging nearby. According to it, we should have had 4 emergency life rafts. I counted 3. My stomach dropped. Rule 4, report missing lifeboats immediately. I double-checked, hoping I'd made a mistake. Counted again, still 3. The inventory clearly showed 4, each with its own serial number. I didn't hesitate this time. Ran straight to the bridge, clipboard in hand. Smith was there alone, looking tired. "Captain," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "we're missing a lifeboat." Smith's head snapped up. "Which one?" I showed him the clipboard. "Number 3. According to the log, it was checked 2 days ago during routine inspection. Everything normal." Smith moved fast for a man his age. He grabbed the ship's radio. "Farley, Sanchez, bridge, now." They arrived within minutes. Smith explained the situation in terse sentences. "We need to find it," he said. "If it's floating out there, we need to retrieve it." "If it's still floating," Sanchez said quietly. Smith ignored that. "Plot search patterns. Standard recovery procedure. We start immediately." I followed them out onto the deck. It was bitter cold, the wind cutting through my jacket. The sea around us was a maze of ice floes and open water, dark in the perpetual twilight of Arctic winter. Sanchez operated the searchlights, sweeping them across the water and ice. Smith stood at the railing, binoculars raised, counting under his breath as he scanned the horizon. I remembered seeing him do this before, counting to 10, never looking at one spot of ice too long. We changed course, moving in a widening spiral pattern away from our original heading. Hours passed. The cold seeped into my bones. My face went numb. Still, we searched. "There!" Sanchez suddenly called out, pointing to starboard. The searchlight illuminated something floating among the ice floes about half a mile away. Something orange, the missing lifeboat. Smith ordered the ship to approach carefully. As we got closer, I could see it more clearly. The small raft bobbed gently in the water, undamaged but empty. No sign of anyone aboard. "Prepare to retrieve," Smith ordered. Farley organized the recovery team. I watched as they lowered the mechanical arm used for retrieving equipment from the water. The process was slow, deliberate. No one wanted to get too close to the water's edge. When they finally got the lifeboat on deck, everyone gathered around it. Empty, as we'd seen from a distance, but not completely empty. There was a small, waterlogged book inside, a logbook. Smith picked it up carefully. The pages were soaked, but the writing was still visible. Except it wasn't writing, not really. Not any language I recognized. Strange symbols, curves and angles that hurt my eyes to look at. "What is that?" I asked. Smith closed the book quickly. "Nothing you need to concern yourself with." But I'd seen enough. The symbols looked like the ones Louis had drawn in his notebook near the end, the ones he said he'd seen in the ice. Smith ordered the lifeboat secured and the ship to resume its original course. No explanation was given to the crew about what we'd found or why the lifeboat had been floating alone in the Arctic Sea. That night, I couldn't sleep again. Kept thinking about the mysterious passenger, the missing lifeboat, the strange symbols. It all connected somehow, I was sure of it. But how? I got up, pulled on my clothes, and decided to walk. The ship was quiet, most of the crew asleep. I avoided my usual routes, not wanting to pass by the spot where Louis had disappeared. I ended up on the upper deck, near the stern. Figured the cold air might clear my head. No one else was around, which I knew was against Smith's orders, but I needed space to think. The deck was dark, lit only by the safety lights along the railings. The wind had died down, leaving an eerie stillness. I could hear the ice creaking against the hull below. I was about to turn back when I saw him, the man from earlier, standing at the far end of the deck, looking out at the ice. I froze. He was maybe 50 feet away, his back to me. Same build, same cold weather gear. It was definitely him. "Hey!" I called out. He turned slowly. Even from that distance, I could see his face clearly in the dim light. Pale, expressionless. He looked directly at me for a long moment. Then he turned and walked straight through the closed door that led to the interior of the ship. Not opened it. Through it. I ran to the door, yanked it open. The corridor beyond was empty and dark. But there, on the floor, wet footprints, leading away from the door, down the corridor. I followed them, my heart hammering in my chest. The footprints led down one level, then another, leaving a trail of melting ice water. They ended at the entrance to the cargo hold, a large space where we stored equipment and supplies too big for the regular storage areas. The door was ajar. I pushed it open slowly. The cargo hold was dimly lit by emergency lighting. Stacks of crates and containers created a maze throughout the space. The footprints continued between them, leading toward the far wall. I followed, moving cautiously between the containers. The temperature dropped with each step. My breath fogged in front of me. That wasn't right. The cargo hold was supposed to be temperature controlled. I turned a final corner and stopped dead. The back wall of the cargo hold wasn't there anymore. Instead, there was a solid wall of ice, thick, blue-white, glowing faintly from within. It shouldn't have been possible. We were inside the ship, 3 levels down. But there it was. The wet footprints led directly to it, then stopped. Human faces stared out from within the ice. Dozens of them, frozen in expressions of terror or plea. Hands pressed against it from the inside, like they were trying to break through. One face was closer to the surface than the others. A face I recognized. Louis. I hadn't been sleeping. Not since finding Louis's face in that impossible wall of ice. 5 days had passed, and every night was the same routine, lying in my bunk, staring at the ceiling, waiting for morning. The ship felt different now, quieter. Everyone moving through the corridors with their heads down, conversations dying when someone new walked into a room. We were 5 weeks into the voyage. The Arctic winter had settled in completely. Endless night with just a few hours of gray twilight around midday. The temperature had dropped to -50 outside, and even the interior corridors had a permanent chill that the heating system couldn't quite push back. I'd been avoiding my cabin as much as possible. Every time I walked in, I half expected to see that wall of ice again, with Louis staring out at me. So I'd volunteered for extra shifts, taken on maintenance jobs nobody wanted, anything to stay busy and away from that empty bunk beneath mine. Today, I was securing equipment on the outer deck, tying down loose items, checking the integrity of the storage containers, making sure nothing would shift if we hit rough ice. The work was mind-numbing but necessary. The wind cut through my layers, finding every gap in my clothing. My fingers were stiff inside my gloves, and my breath frosted instantly in front of my face. I finished securing a stack of emergency containers and straightened up, stretching my back. That's when I noticed it. A flash of white against the dark sky. I squinted, not sure I was seeing correctly. A bird circling the ship. That couldn't be right. We were deep in Arctic waters, surrounded by nothing but ice for hundreds of miles. No birds lived out here, especially not in winter. I watched it bank against the wind, its wings extended. A seagull, a single solitary seagull flying in lazy circles around the yamal. Rule 5. Never follow lone seagulls. My stomach tightened. I'd seen what happened when Louis broke Rule 2. The knocking, the frost climbing up his arms, his body fused to the hull, and then finding him trapped in that wall of ice. The bird made another circle, closer this time. I could see its white body clearly against the dark sky, could make out the gray markings on its wings. It looked normal, just a regular seagull. But it shouldn't have been here. I glanced around the deck, relieved to find myself alone. No one else to be tempted by the bird's presence. I turned back to my work, determined to ignore it and finish my shift. The deck door opened behind me. I turned, expecting to see Farley or one of the other crew members. It was Dr. Boris Smith, the captain's nephew, the researcher, tall and thin with gray eyes that matched his uncle's. He had his heavy parka zipped up to his chin and was carrying a camera with a long lens. "Did you see it?" he asked, excitement clear in his voice. No greeting, no small talk. "See what?" I said, playing dumb. Maybe he hadn't noticed the bird. "The seagull." He pointed skyward. "Larus hyperboreus, the glaucous gull. It shouldn't be this far north during winter." I remembered the captain mentioning his nephew studied ice formations. Apparently he knew his birds too. "Yeah, I saw it," I said carefully. "Weird, right? Maybe we should go inside. It's freezing out here." Dr. Smith wasn't listening. He had raised his camera, adjusting the focus as he tracked the bird's movement. "This is extraordinary," he said, snapping pictures. "I need to document this. The presence of avian life this deep in the Arctic at this time of year. It contradicts everything we know about migration patterns." I took a step toward him. "Dr. Smith, we should really head inside." "Just a moment." He continued photographing the bird. "I need a few more shots." The seagull completed another circle, then changed course. It flew toward the bow of the ship. Dr. Smith lowered his camera. "It's moving. I need to get closer." He started walking, following the bird's path. My heart began pounding against my ribs. "Dr. Smith, wait." He didn't stop, just kept walking along the deck toward the bow, his attention fixed on the seagull. I abandoned my work and went after him. "Dr. Smith, you can't. This is a once-in-a-lifetime observation," he called back over his shoulder. "I need better photographs." I quickened my pace. "There's a rule." "A rule?" He glanced back at me, confused. "About seagulls. We're not supposed to follow them, especially not lone ones." He stopped then, turning to face me fully. His expression shifted from confusion to something like recognition. "Ah, one of my uncle's superstitions." "They're not superstitions," I said, my voice tight. "They're rules for our safety." Dr. Smith's mouth curved into a small, patronizing smile. "Thomas, I appreciate your concern, but I'm a scientist. I don't operate based on maritime folklore." "It's not folklore. Your uncle gave me these rules my first day. They're real. Louis broke one, and now he's gone." Something flickered across his face. Doubt, maybe. But the seagull called out, a harsh cry that cut through the wind. Dr. Smith turned toward the sound. "It's landing on the bow," he said, raising his camera again. "I need to get closer." "Please," I said, reaching for his arm. "Don't." He shook me off. "I'll be fine. Stay here if you're worried." He started walking again, faster now. The seagull had perched on the railing at the very front of the ship, its white feathers stark against the dark metal. I stood frozen, torn between following him and running for help. I'd seen what happened when the rules were broken, but would the captain make it in time? Would anyone believe me? "Dr. Smith!" I shouted. "Stop!" He ignored me, continuing toward the bow. The wind picked up, howling across the deck, nearly drowning out my voice. I made my decision and ran after him. The 5th rule: never follow lone seagulls. He reached the bow and raised his camera. The seagull remained perched on the railing, unnaturally still despite the wind. Dr. Smith leaned forward, trying to get a better angle. I was still 20 feet away when the bird suddenly spread its wings and took flight. It dove straight down toward the water beside the ship. Dr. Smith leaned further over the railing, tracking the bird with his camera. "Fascinating behavior," he called out. "It's diving toward the ice." I was almost to him now, 10 feet, 5. "Get back from the railing," I shouted. Dr. Smith adjusted his position, leaning even further to keep the bird in frame. His upper body was now well beyond the railing, his feet still planted on the deck, one hand gripping the metal bar. The seagull vanished beneath the waves, a small white speck disappearing into the black water. Dr. Smith's body went rigid. His camera fell from his hands, tumbling into the darkness below. He made a strange, choked sound, not quite a scream, more like all the air had been forced from his lungs at once. I reached him just as he pitched forward, his body moving in a way that didn't look natural or voluntary, like something had grabbed him and pulled. My fingers brushed the back of his parka, too late to get a grip. He went over the side head first, without a sound, his body disappearing into the dark water 50 feet below. "Man overboard!" I screamed, running to the railing. "Man overboard!" I stared down at the water, searching frantically for any sign of him. The ship's spotlights illuminated patches of the sea, but all I could see was black water and fragments of ice. No body, no movement, nothing. An alarm blared across the ship. The deck door burst open and crewmen rushed out. Captain Smith was among them, his face pale in the harsh deck lights. "What happened?" he demanded, reaching me. "Dr. Smith, he was following a seagull, taking pictures. It dove into the water, and he just went over." The words tumbled out. I tried to stop him. I told him about the rule, but he wouldn't listen. The captain's face hardened. "Where?" I pointed to the spot where his nephew had gone over. "Right there, just a minute ago." Smith barked orders. Crewmen deployed emergency lights, scanning the water. Others prepared a rescue boat. Farley appeared with thermal imaging equipment, searching for any heat signature in the water. We spent the next 3 hours searching. The ship circled the area where Dr. Smith had fallen. The rescue boat was lowered, crewmen in survival suits combing through the freezing water. Thermal cameras scanned continuously. Spotlights swept across the waves. Nothing. No body. No trace. Not even the camera. Eventually, Captain Smith ordered the search scaled back. The rescue boat was recovered. Most of the crew returned to their stations. I remained on deck with the captain, watching as the last of the spotlights continued their futile sweep. "He's gone," Smith said finally. His voice was flat, empty of emotion. Like the others. I looked at him. His weathered face showed nothing, but his eyes were haunted. "I'm sorry," I said. I tried to warn him about the rule. Smith nodded once. Boris never did listen. Too much curiosity, too much scientific certainty. He turned to me. "Come with me." I followed him off the deck, through the corridors, back to his quarters, the same small office where he'd first given me the rules. He closed the door behind us and went to his desk, unlocking a drawer I hadn't noticed before. "Sit," he ordered, gesturing to the chair across from him. I sat. My body felt heavy, weighed down by what I'd witnessed, by my failure to save Dr. Smith. The captain removed a worn leather journal from the drawer and placed it on the desk between us. It looked old, the cover cracked and faded, the pages yellowed at the edges. "These rules," he said, tapping the journal, "they weren't created by me. They've been passed down, generation to generation, ship to ship, written in blood and loss." I stared at the journal. How long? The first entry is dated 1892, Norwegian whaling vessel. The captain lost his entire crew one by one. He was the only survivor. Smith opened the journal carefully. Each captain adds what they've learned, what they've lost. He turned the pages slowly. I caught glimpses of different handwriting, different languages, diagrams, sketches of ice formations that looked disturbingly like the ones in Lewis's notebook. "What is it?" I asked. "What's out there in the ice?" Smith looked up at me. "Nothing is out there in the ice. The ice itself is the thing." "I don't understand." "The ice remembers," he said. "It holds what it takes, preserves it, and sometimes it wants more." I thought of the faces I'd seen in the ice wall, the hands pressed against it from inside, Louis's terrified expression. "The rules protect us," Smith continued. "They are boundaries, limits. The ice tests those boundaries. It sends temptations. Knocking, seagulls, patterns that draw the eye. And when we break the rules, the ice claims us, adds us to its collection. I felt cold, colder than I had on the deck. Your nephew, my sister's son, Smith said. His voice remained steady, but his hands had tightened into fists on the desk. I warned him many times, but he was a scientist. He wanted proof, evidence. Like the faces in the ice, I said. I saw them. And Lewis, I found him in a wall of ice inside the ship. That's impossible. The ice doesn't obey our laws of physics, our understanding of possible and impossible. Smith closed the journal. It has its own rules. That's why we must have ours. I sat back in the chair, trying to process what he was telling me. It sounded insane, yet I'd seen it with my own eyes. Louis frozen in a wall of ice that shouldn't have been there. Dr. Smith pulled overboard by something unseen. Why are we here? I asked. If you know how dangerous it is, why bring a ship into these waters? Because we must, he replied simply. The passage must be maintained, the routes kept open. If we abandoned these waters, he shook his head. The ice would spread, grow stronger, hungrier. So we're what? Sacrifices? No. We are the wardens, the keepers of the boundary. He leaned forward. But we are not infallible. We make mistakes. We break rules. I thought about Lewis answering the knocking, Dr. Smith following the seagull, curiosity overriding caution. What happens now? I asked. We continue our mission. We maintain our vigilance. Smith returned the journal to the drawer, locking it. And we remember those we've lost. I stood to leave, but paused at the door. Captain, how many? How many have you lost? He looked up at me, his blue eyes hard in his leathery face. Too many, and not enough to satisfy it. I returned to my duties, my mind reeling from what I'd learned. The rest of the day passed in a blur of routine tasks and hushed conversations. The crew knew about Dr. Smith going overboard, but few details had been shared. Just another accident, another loss to the Arctic. That night, I found myself in the observation room, staring out at the endless ice fields surrounding the ship. The Yamal's powerful engines pushed us forward, breaking through the frozen surface, leaving a dark channel of water behind us that quickly began to refreeze. I wasn't alone. Navigator Sanchez stood at the far end of the room, her attention also fixed on the ice beyond the glass. We'd barely spoken since I'd joined the crew, her manner always professional, distant. She noticed me watching her and came over, her steps measured, deliberate. You saw it happen, she said. Not a question. I nodded. He was following a seagull. Rule 5, she said softly. You know the rules too. Everyone who survives more than one voyage knows the rules. She turned back to the window. Some learn them too late. We stood in silence for a moment, watching the ice crack and split as the ship forced its way forward. Something's following us, she said suddenly. Has been since we entered the northern waters. I looked at her. Following us? What do you mean? Look at our wake, she said, pointing to the channel of dark water behind us. Watch carefully. I focused on the ship's trail, the broken ice slowly closing in behind us. At first, I saw nothing unusual. Then, a ripple, a disturbance in the water that didn't match the pattern of our wake. Something moving beneath the surface. What is that? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. We don't know, Sanchez replied. It stays just at the edge of our instrument's range, just far enough away that we can never get a clear reading. Some kind of marine animal? She shook her head. No animal moves like that. No animal follows a ship for weeks without surfacing or changing course. I watched the ripple fade, the water smoothing out, ice beginning to form over it. What do you think it is? Sanchez was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed. Less certain, more vulnerable than I'd ever heard it. I think it's what takes them, she said. What's behind the rules? The thing that wears their faces in the ice. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Their faces. Haven't you noticed? She turned to me, her green eyes intense in the dim light. The faces in the ice, they're all people who've been taken. Crew members, researchers, people who broke the rules. I thought of Lewis's face in that impossible wall of ice. the terror frozen in his expression. "The ice remembers them," I said, repeating Smith's words. "No," Sanchez replied. "Something in the ice remembers them, something that wants us to see what it's collected, what it can take." She moved away from the window. "Be careful, Thomas. It knows your face now. It's seen you watching." She left me there, staring out at the dark water and the endless ice, wondering what was watching us back, wondering what wore the faces of those it took. I stood there a long time, until the ripples in our wake disappeared completely and the ice closed in behind us, erasing any evidence of our passage. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lewis's face in that wall of ice, mouth frozen in a silent scream. Saw Dr. Smith being yanked over the railing like he weighed nothing. The knock, knock, knock that came from inside the walls. It had been 6 weeks since we'd left port, 6 weeks of watching people disappear, 6 weeks of following rules that made no sense until they suddenly did. I got up from my bunk and pulled on my clothes. No point lying there staring at the ceiling. The ship hummed around me, the familiar vibration of the engines a constant reminder we were still moving, still breaking through the endless ice, still alive, at least for now. The corridor was empty when I stepped out. 3 in the morning, skeleton crew on the bridge, everyone else trying to sleep. I headed toward the engine room. Chief Engineer Farley wouldn't mind the company, and the warmth down there beat the hell out of my empty cabin. I took the stairs down 2 at a time, my footsteps echoing. Something felt off. The ship was quieter than usual, the hum of the engines muted somehow. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs listening. The usual mechanical symphony wasn't right, like someone had muted certain instruments in an orchestra. When I pushed open the door to the engine room, Farley wasn't at his usual station. The massive nuclear propulsion system pulsed with energy, gauges all reading normal, but no sign of the chief or his assistant. "Farley?" My voice sounded small against the machinery. No answer. I moved further in, checking the monitoring stations. Everything looked normal, but the absence of personnel made my skin crawl. Then I saw it, a small dark patch on the hull wall, about eye level. I stepped closer, thinking it was an oil leak or something routine. It wasn't oil. Someone had carved symbols into the metal, crude, jagged lines forming patterns that looked familiar. I traced them with my finger, feeling the rough edges. They matched the symbols from that waterlogged logbook we'd found in the missing lifeboat, the ones that looked like Lewis's drawings. I pulled back my hand like the metal had burned me. These weren't fresh marks. The edges were darkened with age, the grooves deep, like they'd been there for years, decades maybe. But that was impossible. This section of hull was replaced during the last refit 18 months ago. I took out my phone and snapped a few pictures, then continued searching the engine room. No sign of Farley or anyone else, but as I moved along the inner hull, I found more symbols, dozens of them, carved at irregular intervals, following no pattern I could discern, but definitely deliberate. The ship's intercom crackled to life, making me jump. "All personnel to the mess hall. Repeat, all personnel to the mess hall immediately." Captain Smith's voice, tight with tension. I hurried up the stairs, the images of those symbols burned into my brain. In the corridor, other crew members emerged from their quarters, faces drawn with exhaustion and fear. Nobody spoke. We all just shuffled toward the mess hall like condemned prisoners. Captain Smith stood at the front of the room, Sanchez beside him. His face looked like it had aged 10 years in the past week, deep lines around his eyes, skin gray with fatigue. He waited until everyone was seated before speaking. "We have a situation." His voice was steady but strained. "Chief Engineer Farley and his assistant are missing." A murmur ran through the crew. 2 more gone. Additionally, we've detected anomalies in the ship's systems, unexplained power fluctuations, communication disruptions. Smith's eyes scanned the room, landing briefly on me, and reports of unauthorized personnel in restricted areas. More murmurs. I wasn't the only one who'd seen the phantom passenger. "We are 7 days from Murmansk. I need everyone to remain at their posts, follow protocols, and most importantly," his gaze swept across the room, "remember the rules." After dismissal, I caught up with Becky in the corridor. She looked as tired as I felt, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. "You look like hell," she said before I could speak. "Found something in the engine room." I showed her the pictures on my phone, carved into the hull. They matched the symbols from that logbook and Lewis's drawings. She took the phone, studying the images with a frown. "These are old, very old." "How can you tell?" "The style. These are similar to protection symbols found in Nordic cultures, pre-Christian. She swiped through the photos. I need to see these in person. Smith just told everyone to stay at their posts. Then we'll have to be careful. She handed back my phone. Meet me in the research lab in 20 minutes. I need to grab something from my quarters. The research lab was cold and sterile, all metal surfaces and fluorescent lighting. Becky was already there when I arrived, a large leather-bound book open on the table in front of her. "Where'd you get that?" I asked, closing the door behind me. "University library. I'm studying Arctic cultures, remember?" She didn't look up from the pages. "These symbols are protective sigils, Old Norse, Sami, some I don't recognize." I leaned over her shoulder. The book showed crude drawings similar to what I'd found on the hull. "Here," she pointed to a page. "This one means barrier, or boundary, and this one," her finger moved to another symbol, "roughly translates to binding. They're used to contain or repel supernatural entities." "You believe in that stuff now? Thought you were all about scientific explanations." She gave me a tired look. "I believe people have been sailing these waters for centuries, Thomas, and I believe they developed systems to explain what they experienced. Whether those explanations are literally true or merely symbolic doesn't change the fact that something is happening on this ship." I couldn't argue with that. "So what are these symbols doing on our hull?" "Someone put them there, probably someone who knew the rules." She flipped to another page in the book. "These symbols form part of a ritual, a banishment, to get rid of whatever's out there." She nodded. "The book describes it as that which dwells beneath the ice and wears the faces of the taken." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. That matched exactly what Sanchez had told me. "Does it say how the ritual works?" "Partially. It requires specific symbols drawn in specific places, and an incantation." She turned another page. "But it's incomplete, like someone deliberately removed parts of it." The ship lurched suddenly, throwing me against the table. The lights flickered, then stabilized. "What was that?" Becky stood, grabbing the book. The intercom crackled. "All hands brace for impact. Repeat, brace for impact." We grabbed onto the bolted-down table as the ship shuddered again, a grinding noise coming from below. "We hit something," I said. "We're in open water. There's nothing to hit." Becky's knuckles were white where she gripped the table edge. The grinding stopped, and the ship steadied. Then came the knocking. Not from one direction, but from everywhere at once. Walls, ceiling, floor, knock, knock, knock. Pause, knock, knock, knock. "It's in the ship," I whispered. The intercom came to life again. "All personnel to quarters immediately. Lock your doors. Do not respond to any knocking. Repeat, do not respond to any knocking." Becky clutched the book to her chest. "We need to finish translating this ritual. It might be our only chance." "My quarters. It's closer." We hurried through the corridors, the knocking following us the whole way. Crew members rushed past us, pale-faced and silent. When we reached my cabin, I locked the door behind us, for all the good it would do. The knocking continued, seemingly from inside the walls themselves. Becky spread the book on my desk, flipping through pages frantically. "Here," she said, pointing to a diagram. "The ritual requires 5 symbols placed at cardinal points around the ship, plus 1 at the center. Then, an incantation spoken at each point." "What's the incantation?" "That's the part that's missing." She slammed her hand on the page in frustration. "Without it, the symbols are just drawings." I paced the small cabin, thinking. The logbook from the lifeboat. It had symbols like these. Maybe it has the missing piece. Where is it? Smith has it. In his quarters, probably. The knocking grew louder, more insistent. Then voices joined in, muffled at first, then clearer. I recognized Lewis's voice among them, calling my name. Becky heard it too, her eyes widening. "We need to get that book," she said. Getting to Smith's quarters meant navigating corridors filled with that awful knocking and the voices of the taken. We moved quickly, staying close to each other. The ship felt wrong, corridors stretching longer than they should, doors appearing where none existed before. "Something's happening to the ship," Becky whispered as we passed a window that showed nothing but solid ice where open water should be. "It's not the ship that's changing," I said, remembering the ice wall I'd found inside the cargo hold. "It's what's around it." We reached the captain's quarters without encountering anyone. living or otherwise. The door was locked. "Now what?" Becky asked. I tried the handle again, then stepped back. "Stand clear." I kicked hard just beside the lock. The door shuddered, but held. I kicked again, putting my weight behind it. On the third try, the lock splintered and the door swung open. Smith's quarters were empty, but showed signs of hasty departure. Chair overturned, papers scattered across the desk. I went straight for the filing cabinet where I'd seen him put the logbook. "Here." I pulled it out, the pages still damp and warped. "Help me find anything that looks like an incantation." We spread the pages on Smith's desk, scanning the water-damaged text. Most was illegible, but the symbols were clear enough, matching those from the hull and Becky's book. "There." Becky pointed to a page near the back. "That sequence repeats at each symbol location. It must be the incantation." The words were in no language I recognized, harsh, guttural sounds written phonetically. "Can you pronounce this?" I asked. "I think so." She studied the page. "It's similar to Old Norse, but older, much older." The ship lurched again, more violently this time. From outside came the sound of ice cracking, a deep, resonant boom that shook the walls. The intercom crackled with static, then Smith's voice. "All hands to emergency stations. We are experiencing severe ice pressure. Prepare for possible evacuation." Becky and I looked at each other. There would be no evacuation, not with what waited outside. "We need to do this now," I said, gathering the pages, "before it's too late." We made our way to the bridge, fighting against the increasingly unstable ship. The corridors were empty now, but the knocking continued, joined by scratching sounds from inside the walls. The bridge was chaos, officers shouting orders, alarms blaring. Through the windows, I could see a storm had descended, snow and ice whipping against the glass. Captain Smith stood at the helm, barking orders into a radio. He saw us, and his eyes widened. "What are you doing here?" "I ordered everyone to quarters." "We know how to stop it," Becky said, holding up the books. "There's a ritual, a banishment." Smith's face changed, hope warring with disbelief. "Show me." Becky quickly explained what we'd found, the symbols on the hull, the matching patterns in both books, the incantation. "Even if this works," Smith said, "we need to place symbols at 5 points around the ship. In this storm, going outside is suicide." "The symbols are already there," I said. "Someone carved them into the hull. We just need to activate them with the incantation." Smith looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "Do it." The storm grew worse as Becky and I prepared. We needed to reach 5 points around the ship's exterior: bow, stern, port, starboard, and the main mast. In the Arctic blizzard, with temperatures well below freezing, we'd have minutes at most before frostbite set in. Smith ordered survival suits for us, the best cold weather gear the ship had. As we suited up, he pulled me aside. "If this doesn't work," he said quietly, "get to a lifeboat. Head south. Don't stop. Don't look back. What about you?" He gave me a grim smile. "Captain goes down with his ship." Fully suited, Becky and I stepped out onto the deck. The wind hit like a physical blow, snow reducing visibility to mere feet. I gripped the railing with one hand, Becky's arm with the other. "Bow first!" I shouted over the howling wind. We fought our way forward, the ship pitching beneath us. The knocking followed us outside, somehow audible even through the storm, a relentless percussion against the hull. At the bow, we found the first symbol, larger than the ones below deck, carved deep into the metal. Becky pressed her gloved hand against it and began to recite the incantation, her voice barely audible over the storm. As she finished, the symbol seemed to pulse with a dull blue light. The knocking stopped just for a moment, then resumed with greater intensity. "It's working!" Becky shouted. "We need to reach the other points." We moved to portside, finding the second symbol midway along the hull. Again, Becky recited the words, and again the symbol glowed. The ship shuddered beneath us, ice cracking loudly against the hull. Starboard side next, fighting across the heaving deck. The third symbol pulsed to life under Becky's hand, brighter than the previous two. The knocking changed rhythm, becoming erratic, desperate. At the stern, we found the fourth symbol partially obscured by ice. I scraped it clear with a knife from my belt, and Becky spoke the words. This time, when the symbol glowed, a wail rose from below, not human, not animal, but something ancient and furious. "The mast!" I pointed upward. The final symbol would be at the top of the main mast, 40 feet above the deck. "I'll go," I said, moving toward the ladder. "You've got to finish the ritual at the center of the ship." "Where's the center?" "The engine room. That's the heart of any vessel." Becky nodded, clutching the book against her chest. "Be careful." I started climbing, the metal rungs slick with ice. The wind tried to tear me loose with each step, the ship's rolling, making every movement treacherous. Below, Becky disappeared back inside, heading for the engine room. 20 feet up, the wind nearly ripped me from the ladder. I clung on, fingers numb despite the insulated gloves. Above me, the mast swayed sickeningly against the storm-dark sky. 30 feet. My muscles screamed with the effort, cold seeping into my bones. The knocking had stopped completely now, replaced by that awful wailing from below. Finally, I reached the top. The symbol was there, carved into the metal just as I'd expected. I pressed my hand against it and recited the incantation from memory, voice raw against the howling wind. The symbol blazed with blue light, brighter than all the others combined. A shock wave rippled outward, momentarily calming the storm around the ship. In that brief stillness, I heard it, a massive crack from below, like the Arctic itself splitting open. I looked down and saw the impossible. The ice around the ship was breaking apart, not from our movement, but from something beneath. A dark shape moved under the translucent surface, massive beyond comprehension. It was rising. I scrambled down the ladder, hands and feet slipping on the icy rungs. Had to reach the engine room, had to find Becky, had to complete the ritual before that thing broke through. Back on deck, I sprinted for the nearest hatch, throwing myself inside just as another crack echoed across the ice field. The corridors were in chaos, emergency lights flashing, alarms blaring. I raced down toward the engine room, praying Becky had made it. She was there, standing before a large symbol carved into the floor that I hadn't noticed before. This one was different, more complex, combining elements of all the others. The center of the ritual. "Thomas," she grabbed my arm. "Did you activate the last symbol?" I nodded, breathless. "Something's coming up through the ice." "I know, I can feel it." She pressed the book into my hands. "We need to do this together. The final incantation requires 2 voices." The ship lurched violently, throwing us both against the wall. From outside came a sound like no other, a roar that was also a scream, amplified 1,000 times. "Now!" Becky shouted. Together we spoke the words, our voices joining in that ancient language. The symbol beneath our feet began to glow, pulsing in rhythm with our speech. The light spread outward, running along the floor in lines that connected to the outer symbols. The wailing outside rose to an unbearable pitch. The ship shuddered as if caught in a massive grip. Through a porthole, I glimpsed something rising from the broken ice. A vast shape, glistening and dark, covered in what looked like faces, human faces, pressed against its surface from within. Lewis was there. Dr. Smith, too. Dozens more I didn't recognize, their mouths open in silent screams. The ritual reached its climax, the final words falling from our lips. The light from the symbols flared blindingly bright, then shot outward in 5 beams that pierced through the hull without damaging it. The thing outside convulsed as the light struck it. The faces in its surface contorted in agony. It began to sink back beneath the ice, the wailing fading to a low moan. Then silence. The storm stopped as suddenly as it had begun. The ship stilled. Outside, the ice began to refreeze, sealing whatever lay beneath back into its prison. Becky and I stood in the sudden quiet, hardly daring to believe it was over. The symbols had faded, returning to their carved state. The book in my hands felt heavier somehow, as if weighed down by what we'd done. The intercom crackled to life. "All hands report status. Engine room, report status." Smith's voice, steady once more. Becky reached for the comm panel. "Engine room secure, Captain. Thomas and I are here. The situation has been resolved." A pause, then, "Understood. Remain at your station. We're resuming course for Murmansk." 7 days later, we docked at Murmansk under clear skies. The Yamal had suffered damage, hull breaches, electrical failures, structural warping that couldn't be explained by ice pressure alone. But she'd made it. Most of us had made it. I handed in my resignation that same day. Smith accepted it without question, only asking, "Will you keep the rules?" I nodded, feeling the paper still folded in my pocket. "Always." He clasped my shoulder. "Then you might live a long life, Thomas Pina." Becky left too, returning to her university with the books and a story no one would believe. We said goodbye at the dock, both knowing we'd never speak of what happened, yet bound by it nonetheless. "What will you do now?" she asked. "Go south," I said. "Somewhere warm, somewhere without ice." She smiled sadly. "The ice isn't what you should fear." "I know, but I'll still sleep better without it." I flew home the next day, the rules paper my only souvenir from the Yamal. I keep it folded in my wallet now, a reminder of what lurks in the northern waters, of the ancient warnings that saved my life while claiming those who ignored them. I'll never go back to the Arctic, never set foot on another ship bound for ice-choked seas, but sometimes, in the deepest part of night, I still hear it. Knock, knock, knock against my bedroom wall. And in my dreams, I see faces pressed against ice that isn't there, mouths forming words I can't quite hear.